the invisible chains that hold you back. Have you ever felt like no matter how much you try to grow, you always end up stuck in the same emotional cycles? Like an invisible force keeps pulling you back into the same struggles, the same doubts, the same pain. What if I told you that this force is not external but deeply embedded within your own mind? These are the 7 toxic emotional patterns that secretly trap you in a low vibration, preventing you from evolving into your highest self. Once you become aware of them, you can begin to break free. The first and most dangerous pattern is resentment. This is the silent poison that keeps your heart shackled to past pain. Every time you replay an old wound, every time you hold on to the anger of what someone did to you, you are reinforcing the same low vibrational state. Think about it. When you hold resentment, who suffers? The other person? Or you? The energy of resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The more you hold on to it, the more your own energy field becomes contaminated. So ask yourself, what resentment am I still carrying? Who or what am I unwilling to forgive? And most importantly, what would happen if I let it go? Now, let's talk about self-doubt. This one is a master at keeping you small. It whispers in your ear, telling you that you are not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough. But have you ever stopped to question where this voice comes from? Is it truly yours, or is it a collection of past experiences, societal conditioning, and fearful thoughts that you've simply accepted as reality?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
Every time you tell yourself, "I can't," you are reinforcing a future where you won't. The universe responds to your inner dialogue. If you keep affirming your limitations, they will become your reality. But here's the truth. Self-doubt is an illusion. It's a mental habit, not a fact. Now here's a challenge. What if, for the next 24 hours, you assumed that everything you desired was possible? That you were already enough? That you were more powerful than you ever imagined? How would you act? Then, there's victim mentality. This is when we believe life is happening to us instead of for us. It's when we blame circumstances, people, or even fate for why we are stuck. But here's the hard truth. The moment you blame someone or something outside of you, you are giving away your power. Yes, bad things happen. Yes, people can be cruel. Yes, life can be unfair. But your response to those events is what shapes your reality. There are people who have endured the worst tragedies and still rise to greatness. And there are people who have had all the advantages in the world, yet remain miserable. The difference: one takes responsibility for their energy, and the other stays trapped in blame. Ask yourself, where in my life am I making excuses? Where am I waiting for something external to change instead of changing myself? Then we have fear of change. This is one of the most deceptive patterns because it disguises itself as comfort. We think we are playing it safe, but in reality, we are imprisoning ourselves. The fear of change keeps you in toxic relationships, unfulfilling jobs, and limiting beliefs. But here's something most people don't realize: staying the same is actually riskier than change. Why? because life is always moving. If you refuse to evolve, you are not staying safe, you are falling behind. Look around you. Everything in nature grows and transforms. The seasons change, the tides shift, the universe expands. The only thing that resists change is fear. So ask yourself, what changes have I been avoiding? What would happen if I embraced the unknown instead of fearing it? This is just the beginning. In the next part, we will uncover the patterns that are even more hidden patterns that control your emotions without you even realizing it. The hidden emotional cages you don't even know you're trapped in. Most people go through life unaware of the invisible forces shaping their emotions. They wake up, feel a certain way, react the same way they always do, and assume that's just how life is. But what if the way you feel isn't random? What if your emotions are being controlled by deep, hidden patterns that you've been reinforcing for years without realizing it? There are toxic emotional loops running in your subconscious, keeping you stuck in a low vibration, making sure you repeat the same experiences over and over. And the worst part, the more you engage with them, the stronger they become. One of the most destructive patterns is attachment to suffering. The mind is addicted to familiarity. Even if something is painful, if it's what you've known for a long time, part of you doesn't want to let it go. This is why some people stay in toxic relationships long after they should have left. Why some people sabotage their own success the moment things start going well. Why some people, even when they have every reason to be happy, feel uncomfortable and find a way to create struggle. It's not because they want to suffer. It's because suffering feels safe. If you've spent years identifying as someone who struggles, as someone who has been wronged, as someone who never gets a break, then what happens when that story no longer fits? Who are you without your pain? The fear of losing that identity keeps people trapped in cycles of misery. Another pattern that keeps people stuck is emotional addiction. Most people think addiction only applies to substances, but emotions are just as addictive. The body gets used to certain chemical reactions that emotions create. If someone has spent years being angry, their nervous system is wired to crave that state. If someone has been anxious for most of their life, their body feels uncomfortable when things are peaceful. This is why some people can't relax, why they always find something to stress about, even when there's no real problem. Their body is addicted to the feeling of stress. And just like any addiction, the more you feed it, the stronger it becomes. Then there's seeking validation from the external world. This is one of the biggest traps because it's disguised as something positive. People are taught from a young age to seek approval, good grades, praise from parents, admiration from peers. But when validation becomes the source of self-worth, happiness is no longer in your control. If other people approve, you feel good. If they don't, you feel worthless. This is why so many people are miserable despite having success, money, or popularity. They've built their entire sense of self on something that can be taken away at any moment. If the world turns against them, they crumble. The deeper problem is that seeking external validation reinforces the belief that you are not enough on your own. It keeps you in a constant state of need, always chasing something outside yourself to feel complete. Another silent destroyer of peace is guilt and shame. These are emotions that serve a purpose in small doses. They help people recognize when they've done something wrong. But when they linger and become part of someone's identity, they turn into chains that are almost impossible to break. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And when someone believes they are inherently broken, they sabotage their own happiness. They push away love because they don't believe they deserve it. They stay in destructive situations because deep down, they feel that's all they are worthy of. And the worst part, most of this happens unconsciously. People don't realize they are punishing themselves. They just think life keeps going wrong for them. Fear of judgment is another low vibrational pattern that quietly controls people. The fear of what others think is one of the most common reasons people don't chase their dreams, don't express their true selves, don't take risks. They imagine worst-case scenarios in their heads. What if people laugh at me? What if I fail and everyone sees? But here's the truth. Most people are so consumed with their own fears and insecurities that they barely think about anyone else. The judgment people fear is mostly an illusion. And even when others do judge, it's usually a reflection of their own insecurities, not a reflection of reality. Living in fear of judgment is handing over the keys to your life and letting others decide how you should live. Then there's over-identification with emotions. This is when people believe their emotions define them. They feel sadness and say, I am depressed. They feel anger and say, I am an angry person. But emotions are temporary states, not permanent identities. They come and go like waves. The problem is when people attach too much meaning to them. They start building their identity around fleeting emotions, reinforcing them instead of letting them pass. And the more someone identifies with an emotion, the harder it becomes to break free from it. The most dangerous pattern of all is living in the past or the future instead of the present. People either carry the weight of past regrets, mistakes, and traumas, or they are consumed by anxiety about the future. Either way, they are never fully here. And when the mind is always somewhere else, life passes by without being truly lived. The present moment is the only place where real change can happen, but most people are never fully present. They are stuck in mental loops, replaying old wounds, worrying about things that haven't even happened yet. And in doing so, they miss the only moment that actually exists, the now. Now, the question is, what happens when someone realizes they've been trapped in these patterns? Awareness alone is not enough. Knowing a cage exists doesn't automatically open the door. The real work begins when someone starts rewiring their mind, breaking the habits that have been controlling them for years. Most people look for external solutions, changing jobs, changing partners, changing locations, without realizing that their internal world is the root of their suffering. If the mind doesn't change, the same problems will follow them wherever they go. In the next part, we're going even deeper. We're dismantling the illusion completely. Because breaking free from low vibrational patterns isn't just about recognizing them, it's about dissolving them at the root. The ultimate shift, how to break free from low vibrational traps and elevate your energy permanently. Everything that keeps you stuck in a low vibration is a loop, an emotional cycle that repeats itself, feeding on your reactions, growing stronger every time you engage with it. The only way out is to break the loop at the root. Most people try to fix their emotional state by forcing positive thinking, by distracting themselves, by chasing temporary highs. That never works long term. The patterns always return because the core programming hasn't changed. The real shift happens when you stop reacting the same way you always have. The moment you stop feeding the loop, it begins to weaken. When resentment rises, most people engage with it. They replay the past, justify their anger, reinforce the pain. That strengthens the loop. But what happens if you don't react? If you observe the feeling without attaching a story to it, the loop begins to break. The same applies to self-doubt. The moment you stop fighting it, stop arguing with it, stop believing it, its grip weakens. The same applies to victim mentality. The moment you stop blaming, stop waiting, stop feeling powerless, the energy shifts. The pattern loses its fuel. But breaking these patterns isn't just about stopping reactions. It's also about rewiring the nervous system. Emotional addiction is real. The body gets used to stress, anxiety, sadness. It craves those states, even when they are destructive. That's why people unconsciously create drama, why they sabotage peace, why they feel restless when things are going too well. The body is looking for its familiar emotional fix. The only way to break that is to consciously rewire the system. That means sitting in stillness when the urge to react comes. That means breathing through discomfort instead of feeding it. That means disrupting the old response patterns with new ones. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through presence. The mind is constantly jumping between the past and the future, keeping people trapped in regret or anxiety. But neither of those states exist outside of thought. The present moment is the only reality. When you fully engage with now, the emotional loops lose their power. That's why meditation is so effective. It forces presence. But presence isn't just about sitting in silence. It's about full engagement with whatever is happening, without resistance, without mental interference. Another key shift is realizing that emotions are not personal. Most people identify with their emotions. They say, "I am sad, I am anxious," as if these states define them. But emotions are just temporary sensations passing through. They come and go. The problem is that people attach meaning to them, reinforce them, build identities around them. The moment you stop personalizing emotions, they lose control over you. Instead of saying, "I am angry," you recognize, "There is anger in me right now." That slight shift in perspective creates distance. It stops the emotion from consuming you. Breaking free from external validation is another major step. Most people live their lives based on how others perceive them. They chase approval, fear rejection, modify themselves to fit expectations. But the truth is, no external validation will ever be enough if internal validation is missing. People who need external approval are always in a state of lack, always chasing something outside themselves to feel whole. But the moment you stop seeking, stop needing, stop waiting for permission to be enough, everything shifts. You become untouchable. Letting go of guilt and shame is another essential step. These emotions are like chains that hold people in a low vibration. But guilt and shame are only useful when they lead to change. If they linger, they turn into self-punishment, and self-punishment serves no purpose. The past is unchangeable. The only thing that matters is what you do now. Holding on to shame doesn't make you a better person, it keeps you trapped in the same cycles. The moment you forgive yourself, not just intellectually but deeply, completely, the weight lifts. Fear of judgment is another illusion that keeps people small. Most fear is based on imagined outcomes. People hesitate to express themselves, to take risks, to pursue what they truly want because they are afraid of what others might think. But in reality, most people are too consumed with their own insecurities to care about anyone else's. And even when people do judge, their opinions are based on their own fears, their own conditioning, their own limitations. The moment you stop fearing judgment, you gain a level of freedom most people will never experience. Over-identification with emotions is another major trap. People believe their emotions define them. They feel sadness and say, "I am depressed," but emotions are just temporary states. They pass. The problem is when people attach to them, reinforce them, make them part of their identity. The moment you stop identifying with emotions, they lose control over you. Living in the past or the future instead of the present is the final and most destructive pattern. Regret, guilt, and nostalgia trap people in the past. Fear, anxiety, and worry trap people in the future. But the past no longer exists, and the future hasn't happened yet. The only real moment is now. People waste their entire lives trapped in their minds, missing the only moment that actually exists. The present is the only place where change happens, where healing happens, where life happens. The more you ground yourself in now, the more you free yourself from suffering. But knowing all of this isn't enough. Awareness is just the first step. The real transformation happens through action, through consistent practice, through actively breaking the loops every time they try to pull you back in. Most people wait for change to happen to them. They wait for motivation, for a perfect moment, for an external force to shift their reality. But waiting is just another trap. The shift happens the moment you decide. The moment you stop feeding the old patterns and start creating new ones. Change isn't something that happens in the future. It happens now, in the micro decisions you make every single moment. Every time you choose presence over overthinking, you break the loop. Every time you choose a new response instead of the old pattern, you rewire your system. Every time you stop reacting with the same emotions, you dissolve the old identity. This is the real work, not passive learning, not temporary inspiration, but deep, internal rewiring. The kind of change that doesn't just shift a mood but transforms an entire reality. Most people will never do it. They will keep repeating the same emotional cycles, living the same experiences, wondering why nothing changes. But those who truly commit to breaking free will experience a level of clarity, peace, and power that is unimaginable to most. Breaking free isn't about gradual improvement. It's about a decision, a complete shift in perspective, a refusal to keep feeding the same emotional loops that have controlled you for years. The moment you stop engaging in the old patterns, they begin to dissolve. And the more consistently you do this, the more your entire reality shifts. This is how you permanently elevate your energy. Not by forcing positivity, not by fighting emotions, but by fully understanding the mechanics of these patterns and refusing to feed them any longer. The moment you stop being a prisoner of your own mind, everything changes. The biggest trap people fall into is believing change takes time, that they need months or years to break free from emotional patterns that have controlled them for so long. That's a lie. The truth is, change happens the moment a decision is made. The moment you stop identifying with the old version of yourself, the shift is instant. But most people don't make that decision. They hesitate. They cling to their familiar suffering. They negotiate with their own limitations. And in doing so, they stay stuck in the same emotional loops, telling themselves they'll break free one day, while reinforcing the very patterns they want to escape. The only way out is complete internal rejection of the old way of being. No more excuses, no more waiting, no more feeding the same emotions with the same reactions. Most people don't realize how much of their suffering is self-created. They think their emotions just happen to them, that they have no control. But emotions are responses patterns that have been reinforced over time. Every time you react the same way to a situation, you deepen the neural pathways in your brain that make that reaction automatic. That's why people feel trapped in their emotions. Not because they're powerless, but because they've conditioned themselves into these emotional states over years of repetition. But just as these patterns were created, they can be broken. The key is disrupting the automatic response. The moment an old emotion rises, anger, fear, self-doubt, resentment, you have a choice. You can feed it, reinforce it, react the same way you always have, or you can stop, observe it without engaging. Let it pass through without attaching a story to it. That single moment of non-reaction is where freedom begins. The problem is, people are addicted to their emotional responses. They don't just feel emotions, they cling to them, justify them, identify with them. They defend their suffering as if letting go of it would mean losing a part of themselves. It's not the pain that traps people. It's their attachment to it. They replay old wounds, relive past betrayals, reinforce their struggles through constant mental repetition. But what happens if you stop? If you refuse to keep repeating the same stories, the same justifications, the same narratives that keep you tied to the past? The emotions lose their grip. They fade. Not because they've been suppressed, but because they are no longer being fed. Breaking free isn't about fixing emotions. It's about realizing they don't need to be fixed. They are just temporary experiences that come and go. The problem is never the emotion itself. The problem is the attachment to it, the belief that it defines you, the habit of reinforcing it through reaction. The moment you stop reacting, the emotion loses power. And when enough emotional patterns lose power, the entire identity built around them collapses. That's when real transformation happens. Not by adding something new, but by stripping away everything false. Most people wait for external circumstances to change before they allow themselves to feel different. They think if they had more money, more success, more love, they'd finally be at peace. But that's backwards. External change doesn't create internal peace. Internal peace creates external change. The way you feel determines how you act, how you perceive reality, how you attract experiences. If your emotional state is chaotic, your life will reflect that chaos. If your emotional state is stable, life begins to align effortlessly. But stability doesn't come from controlling external events. It comes from controlling your internal responses. One of the most powerful shifts is realizing that nothing outside of you has the power to affect your inner state unless you allow it. Most people give their power away constantly. They let circumstances dictate their mood. They let other people's opinions control their self-worth. They let temporary setbacks define their entire future. But all of that is a choice. The moment you decide that nothing external has the power to shake you, you become untouchable. It's not about suppressing emotions, it's about not being ruled by them. It's about recognizing that you are the source of your state of being, and nothing outside of you has the authority to change that unless you give it permission. The final and most important realization is that freedom isn't something you find. It's something you reclaim. It was never lost. It was just buried under layers of conditioning, emotional habits, and false beliefs. The moment you stop feeding the illusions that keep you trapped, the weight lifts. The struggle ends. Not gradually, not someday. But the moment you fully decide to stop being controlled by the patterns that have defined you for so long, the moment you realize you were never actually trapped, only convinced that you were,